All right, I just wanted to show how I handle a specific problem that I run into occasionally when editing drums. And so I have a session here where um, the drums are pretty much 90% edited. I'm just doing some final edits and such. This is kind of like a metalcore type song, so the drums are very heavily gridded and they're played really well. But just to get that really tight sound, we do edit them pretty tightly. And the scenario that I'm going to talk about is when there's a flam between the kick and the snare. And I'll show you an example of that here. But essentially, these two drums were intentionally played, or supposed to be played concurrently at the same time. And naturally, because of the human body, there will never be a perfect scenario where they hit at exactly the same time. Having that expectation is wild. And sometimes it sounds really cool when there is that flam or that difference between the notes. But as you'll hear here, it's a little distracting in the part. So I'll play the part, give you some context, and then talk about how I'm going to solve this. Okay, so I'll start it up even back further a little bit. Just listen to when it gets to this part right here. You can kind of hear that it almost sounds like a hiccup in the drums. I'll play it one more time. So this right here, as you can visually see, the kick is before the snare. Now, there are some ways to handle this kind of in a cheating type of a way. And that's cheating phase. That's like the no-no. But it can work in certain circumstances. In fact, I've used it in this song already. But that kind of fix, I'm not sure is going to work here, but I'll demonstrate it anyways. Basically, because when we edit drums, we edit them as a unit, just to keep at least the consistent phase that happened at recording. And so for me, one way that this can be handled is we can take the drum that's not the most apparent in the like the room mics and the overhead mics, and actually move that drum out of phase, because the punch of that drum that we hear from the spot mic, like this kick in and the kick out microphone, is going to be much more audible than the kind of the room ambience that we're going to get. So one way is to really cheat this. This is not the best way to do it, but sometimes we have to do it. So So basically what we want to do is ungroup our drums and have a group where we're only controlling the kick. In this case, the snare intentionally is a little bit louder, a little bit more audible in the rooms and the overhead. And so what I can kind of do here potentially is just move this kick over. Again, now it's out of phase with this drums, with the rest of the drums. So I'm going to try to keep it in phase as long as possible and cut it out pretty quickly. And so this is kind of the sound that we get now with the kick drum moved out of phase. And that actually doesn't sound bad. Listening as a kit, let me just solo the kick real quick. So I do hear a little bit of a hiccup there. And then the snare. So for me, the problem with this is that the snare gets cut off a little bit. It kind of has this like ringing thing that's happening there. And as you can see, just because this part's a little bit fast, bring back this all drums group. This next kick comes in pretty quick because it's a fast part. So I don't think that that's going to be the best way to solve that. So I'm going to back out. And then I'm going to talk about another way to potentially solve this, which would be to utilize a sample and maybe not in the way that you might be anticipating. So what I'm going to do is actually open up another session here. this is a sample session that was made at the time of recording these drums. The drummer and the engineer basically did some deep samples of all of the drums that um, would essentially be hit, and we wanted to have this for these types of scenarios. They always come in handy, so it's always kind of nice to do it. And then after the sessions were delivered to me, what I did is I just used Pro Tools folders to kind of go through and isolate the parts so that when I open the session, if I need to open the session, I know where to look. So in this case, this is the snare folder, and I'm going to actually use a snare sample here to try to get this solved. So I'm going to kind of listen through these snare hits. I know I just want one big snare hit. This is totally this specific use case. And so let's listen through some of these snares here. That one sounded really good. Okay, I think I like this one the best. And so how I'm going to do this is I'm going to zoom in, and there's been no phase treatment to these drums yet. There will be some slight adjustments that are made before we go to mixing. But for right now, I just want to keep the exact same relationship to all these microphones that were there at the time of recording, so that when I do implement this sample into the rest of the drums that were recorded, that if I change anything in terms of the phase relationship, it stays relative to those to those tracks. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of create my own little sample. I'm going to see kind of where this snare top was hit, and just to kind of give myself some space. You notice that these 4 tracks are grouped right now. So I'm going to create just a small fade here, and then I'm going to go here to this next hit, and I'm going to probably cut it off right here. Again, we kind of want a little bit of sustain from the room. I don't want to over fade this too much. So, this is kind of just trial and error. And when you do this enough, you can kind of get the feel for how much sustain that you want. I don't really want this to die out. I kind of want it to just kind of fit right into like those other room sounds that are already happening in the drum. And that might make more sense when we actually implement this. So right now, here we have this. Okay, so that's going to be our sample. Now, the other thing that I didn't really mention is that we have multiple mics here, but the only ones that I'm really going to pay attention to are the core group here. So when this drum set was mic'd, we did have spot mics on certain cymbals. I'm not going to worry about those. During this part, those cymbals aren't being hit, so they'll most likely be automated out anyways, just because of phase reasons. So I know that the snare, I want to hear it in the overhead, and I want to hear it in the rooms. I'm not really worried about the bleed into the kick mic. That's such a minor thing, and it's not what I'm going to be focused on. That's just not going to it's not going to add anything. But what I am going to do is to make this file transfer a little bit simple. I'm going to take these overhead to this left and right, and I'm just going to convert them to a stereo file, so that it just makes it a little bit easier. So now I have a snare top, a snare bottom, an overhead, and a room sample. And what I'm going to do in Pro Tools here is I'm going to select each one of these, and then I'm going to do Option Shift 3, which is going to create new consolidated clips for me. And then I'm going to export these clips as files. And these sessions are at 2448. This is in order to kind of keep this stereo, this like 4 track and not get 6 tracks from these 2 stereo. I'm going to keep this as interleaved. This will actually bounce it out as a stereo wave file instead of 2 mono stereo files. So I'm going to choose this. We're going to make sure that we're in the right spot. So in this case, we were working on this song here. And what I'm going to do here is, I'm going to open here. I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm just going to call it samples. This can be done any way you want. I mean, we could put it in the audio files. I just basically want a quick way to reference it. So now my samples are bounced. They're over there as raw audio files. I'm going to go back to my drum edit. Let me save this. That's fine. In case I need to do it with another session. That was a good snare hit. And wait for this session to load. And okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import that audio. And so we're going to go to our location here. We're in tracking from the studio. And let's see, this track is here. And here they go. Okay, we didn't do a great job of naming them, but just in terms of being quick here, I'll handle that in a second. I'm going to convert these. Save it in the audio file. That way, if it ever gets moved, we retain a copy of that in the audio files. Okay, and it's going to populate them all the way down here. And so we didn't name these very well, but I'm going to say snare replacement overhead, snare replacement room, snare replacement bottom, and snare replacement top. Could have been done a lot quicker, but this is just showing you exactly what's going on here. I'm going to group these together. Might make them something a little bit noticeable in terms of color. And I'm going to bring them over as a group here. Here, made a marker for myself. Okay. And I'm going to put these through the same bus. And if I solo these, okay, great. Now, a couple things to know here is that it's not going to sound exactly perfect right off the bat. I mean, we already have some basic leveling here. So for the room here, if I want to get this to match, I'm going to pull it down negative 13.2 just to match this room, the recorded part. And then we do have the overhead left and overhead right separated here. It's not a big deal. I'll handle that in a few minutes, but that's at 0. And then snare top and snare bottom. Just for editing, I have this clipper on here, but I'll pull that down and I'll match the volume. So 5.3 and negative 11.5. So I'll pull this down here, push this up 5.3. This is no science at all. A negative 11.5. This is just to get me listening to the drums so that I can kind of hear it. So now if I solo these now, I can. Okay, so that's like the mix of the snare that we have in this in these original tracked parts. Okay, cool. So now let's do some surgery. Where's my part? Here we go. A little difficult to navigate sometimes in the sea of different clips that are cut up and stuff, but that's what we're paid to do. So here's the part that we have the flam. And if you listen, this solution is really only going to happen if you have this very specific scenario where there's a similar part that was previously tracked. So I have these 4 kick hits essentially, and then pay really close attention to what cymbal's being hit. So I noticed that this pattern is kind of repeated a couple times before that. And so I'm going to listen to see if that's going to apply here. Yeah, so there's that one cymbal that's being hit constantly. It's like on the quarter notes. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try the first one, because this first instance, if we do these two, the second instance, and move it over here, it might sound a little copy and pasted. So having this first one might give us a little bit more of a variety. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure I'm in grid mode, and I don't have to be in this insane triplet mode either. I can probably come out a little bit. There we go. Now we're playing with eighth notes. A little bit easier to digest. All right, so I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to copy that with C. I'm going to paste it in here. Okay. And then I'm going to come over here to where it's supposed to be, and I'm going to paste it. Okay, it didn't work. So let's see. Copy it, and we're going to paste it. There we go. All right. So this kick hit is still poking out a little bit, so I'm going to pull this back a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is listen to see if this is going to be seamless or not. I kind of want to get this real close to that next hit. We don't want to see that poking through. Okay. So again, I copied that first 4 kick notes over, 4 kick drum hits over, and let's hear what that's like. Okay. That sounds pretty smooth to me. Okay, but we're missing the snare hit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull this in, and we're going to find where that snare hit was supposed to be. And because this is the sample, because of how we placed the sample, it should line up perfectly right there. And let's hear what that sounds like. Let's hear it again. Awesome. So now that snare is in there. Nice. One more time. Okay, so there's a couple things that are going on here too. There's some level discrepancy here, so I'm wondering why that might be. Let's see. We have snare top. That's good. Okay, so what might happen, what might very well have happened here, is that we have a difference in the of how the snares are played. So in this case, what I'm going to do is kind of even further look into this and see what the rooms sound like. Make sure we're matching. Yeah, so that room is much louder. So in this case, what we can do is pull up the volume to try to match that. So I'm listening for the snare in the room that was recorded. And I'm going to try to match that by bringing up this volume. Okay, that's getting pretty close there. Awesome. And then same thing with the overhead. So we'll have overhead left and right, and we'll have this. Listen just for the snare. Okay, so it is a little bit louder. I don't know if it's 6 dB louder. Maybe it is. Yeah, that sounds about right. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just pull up each 6 dB. I know I could handle it at the volume, at the track volume, but this is doing this to the actual clip allows me to keep this relative level the same, so I can see, hey, we are up whatever this arbitrary value is, and it matches what's over here. So I'm just literally trying to get the samples to match. So let's listen to the snare top. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot more ring in that other snare, and that's okay. Let's listen to the snare bottom. Yeah, sounds great to me. So back in context with everything, let's hear if we fix the flam or not. Nice. All right, that sounds so much better to me than than it was previously. And so that's kind of how I would fix one of these flams. I mentioned the other way too, but this is for getting these really tight sounds. This stuff's having extra tricks in your bag is always good. So yeah, that's kind of this little tip. Let me know what you think.